right.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, good. You're back.
Okay, so to start off, we're just gonna get some basics of like, what is composting and why should we do it? So composting is a naturally occurring process where microbes, which are just little tiny living organisms, break down organic material. And it allows us to convert those materials like food waste, leaves, or grass cuttings into an organic soil amendment. And organic just means it's alive and it contains carbon. So why should we compost? The two main reasons are food waste reduction and also it's good for the soil. So with food waste, I was kind of surprised when I heard this, but 1/3 or 30% of the food produced in the United States ends up just going in the trash. So that accounts for 20% or about 1/5 of all garbage is food waste. So compost gives us a ecologically better alternative for that. It's also good for the soil. So composting improves the soil structure. It kind of loosens it up. It allows the roots to grow deeper. And it adds nutrients so we don't have to use artificial fertilizers or pesticides. And it helps the plants use water more efficiently.
Okay. So there's four basic steps to composting. Of course, it's a little bit more complex, but I kind of helps to break it down. Does anybody in the audience want to read the 4 steps out loud? So you don't have to hear me talking the whole time. All right.
Number 1, acquire compost bin and place on property. Number 2, add compost materials. 3, maintain compost pile before use compost liquid.
All right, so we'll go with the first step. I always am like paranoid that I misspelled require, but that looks right? So the first step is you want to decide what sort of bin to use, right? So there's kind of 2 different ways you can go about it. Of course, you can buy a pre-made bin. So we'll actually be raffling off bins today. So we have about 9 of these cedar bins. You'll see them right there by Naomi. And then we have about 2 of these tumblers. So because there's less people coming to the workshop than we expected, you all could potentially take home one of these compost bins. You can also obviously purchase a compost bin from the store or online. There's so many different types of compost bins and with all different kind of prices and things like that. So you can also do that. You can also build your own. And you really can make it as simple or as complex as you want it. Some of the more common materials that you can use to build your compost are wood pallets, cinder blocks, chicken wire. Some people even just have a pile of stuff in their yard. That's not necessarily advisable, but it can be as, you can have as like nice as state of the art of a compost bin as you want, or you could have as simple a compost bin as you want. A lot of times people ask, how many compost bins do you really need? Most of us here live in the city of St. Paul. We probably don't have a ton of space in our backyards, including me. So I usually say 1 is plenty for a household. If you produce a lot of compost and you want to build 2, that's great. But you really only need 1 compost per household. So the other thing is sort of once you have your compost bin, where do you put it? So one of the things that I feel like people forget a lot is that it should be convenient, right? So you don't want your compost bin really far from your house. You want it close to kind of the source of the compost. And one way to make things really convenient is we give out these for the challenge. We give out these food scraps buckets. So just having one of these in your kitchen in particular to be able to toss your food scraps in, so that way you're not having to make as many trips between your compost bin and the house. This just allows you to kind of make it a little bit easier. Of course, because we live in the city, you want your compost bin to be in compliance with city ordinances. So you want it to be 5 feet from the property lines, 2 feet from the alley. Like I tell most people, I don't think there's anyone really who's inspecting your yard to make sure your compost bin is like 5 feet from the property line or 2 feet from the alley, but just something good to keep in mind if you're able to do that. And then you want it to be in a good area for composting. So you want it to make sure the ground is level and well drained. You don't want it in a place where water is going to pool up and get your compost kind of all wet and damp. You want it to be protected from the wind, so the materials aren't kind of flying everywhere. And you also want it to be sunny if possible. Any questions about compost placement? Right. Oops, oh, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. All right, so the second step is you want to make sure you add your compost materials, and Naomi, I'll let you take it away.
So we're gonna play a little game of 3 truths and a lie. So of these 4 components, brown and green materials, water, air, and sun, 3 of them are necessary for composting and one of them is not required. Does anyone want to guess which one isn't required? I'll guess water.
Okay, there goes. Anybody else?
Some might be, but
Yep, so the sun is actually,
required.
yeah,
Oh, which one's?
yes, yeah. So the sun does help, so it can help heat up your compost, but it's not absolutely necessary. The 3 things you do need are the brown and green materials, the water, and then the air, the oxygen. People always make fun of me for this picture because they're like, "Do you need hair for composting?" No, it was supposed to be a picture to show wind or oxygen. All right, so we'll go through quickly the 3 different types of compost materials. So first of all, you have your brown and green materials. So these are kind of the physical items that are going to break down and create the kind of that really black, rich compost that you see. The other item that you need is water. So the microbes that help to break down the organic matter, they actually need water to survive. However, like anything in life, there needs to be a balance, right? You want to have you want the moisture level in your compost to be the same moisture level as a right here, well run out sponge. So too much water. Obviously if your compost is too dry, it's not going to decompose. If there's too much water, it's going to decompose anaerobically, meaning without oxygen, and it's going to start to really smell. And there's going to be odors coming from your compost. The other thing that you need is oxygen. Again, the microbes need oxygen, just like humans, to survive. So you want to make sure that you're turning your compost bin, materials in your compost bin, so you're getting that ventilation of air. You also want to pick a compost bin that has good ventilation. So like the cedar bin is basically there's a lot of space for air to get in and out. Even with the tumbler bin, there's a lot of holes that are kind of poked in the bin, so you're getting that really nice airflow. We're going to get right into that. Yeah, a great question. I love that question. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go kind of over the brown and green materials. So these are really the kind of the physical items that are going to make up your compost. So like it says up here, green materials are not always green, but they're nitrogen-rich materials. Generally, they tend to have a little bit more moisture. So this includes, and they're also high in nitrogen, which is one of the soil amendments that compost gives you, is that nitrogen that's used to grow plants. So this can include your fruits and vegetable scraps, grass clippings, coffee grounds and tea bags, which people generally think are brown materials, and green yard plants. Typically for this challenge, what I tell people is a good rule of thumb is most of your food scraps are going to be grains, or because they're generally a little bit more moist and they're nitrogen rich. Then you have your dry browns, which are carbon-rich materials, and they're generally, like it said, they're generally a little bit drier, and they include things like straw and hay, wood shavings or chips, leaves that are raked in the fall, dead plants, weeds, and clippings, and even things like shredded newspaper, cardboard, and office paper. So again, a good rule of thumb, at least for this challenge, is for yard waste materials, particularly yard waste that you collect in the fall. That's going to be really great for getting your brown materials. And then we have the things that we don't want in your backyard compost. And this can get confusing because some of these items you're able to put in kind of curbside composting, or you're able to bring to the drop-off sites, but they're just not great for backyard composting because they either break down really slow, or they attract animals, or they just get things in your compost that you don't want, like pesticides. So this would include like meat, bones, fish scraps, dairy products, fats, grease, lards, or oils, diseased or invasive plants. That's kind of really up to you. Weeds gone to seed, pet waste, or really anything treated with pesticides. Does anybody have any questions about those? All right. Because now we have a little bit of a quiz. So all of you should have received a laminated photo with a material on it. And that material is either a brown material, a green material, or something that should not go in your compost. So we'll have you start here. And I'm sorry, can you remind me of your name again? Nicole. And so we have this beautiful poster up here, and I want you to place your item, tell us what it is, and place it in the appropriate section over there.
Also be a little runner.
Oh, yeah, yeah. What do you have?
For needles affected.
Very good.
Okay, what she said, what did she say?
For needles infected with fungus.
Burn.
Yeah,
Oh.
for like the tree. Cool. Nice, very nice. That's exactly right. Yep. Yep. It takes too long to break down. It doesn't, your compost doesn't get hot enough to break it down, like the industrial compost does. It also just attracts animals and like things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it starts to smell really bad. Yeah. What color are they? Okay.
So I'm assuming.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. I tried to throw in a couple hard ones, so maybe
So
one
the
of them.
pattern for paper has, I mean, well, obviously, if you're gonna give it to the office, it's gonna have ink and.
The most ink is organic based. Yeah. Usually you're fine if it has ink on it. Yeah, I thought so too. I thought that was a weird one too,
You
but
know, what about like, I feel like it's newsprint, plain like that moving companies use for packing, but I always get nervous that there's like a coating on the paper.
yeah, there's a,
Something to consider.
that's a great question. I would have to look into that. If it has a coating, that would be like a plastic coating, that would be a no, obviously, because it can't break down, but I'd have to like see it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's changed a little bit. What is organic is.
Yeah. You can also put egg cartons and stuff too. That breaks down pretty quickly. Yeah. And I think you're maybe next. Speaking of which, oh, you're next. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Patricia. You can participate too.
But he's still around.
Oh, gosh.
That's not going anywhere.
Mhm.
Right?
And as we
I
can.
mean, I just made that.
Oh, yes, yes. So, yes, that would be a no. That would be a no. Yeah.
Here.
I have fall dry to this.
Browns.
Yes, perfect. Now, does anyone remember where, because this is a tricky one because it looks one color, it is really another type of material. Does anyone know where coffee grounds would go? Greens, yeah, perfect, because they're high in nitrogen. So people usually get that one confused. Another one that's kind of, it doesn't really fit into a specific category is eggshells as well. That provides like a lot of calcium in the compost.
And those are gravy as well.
I would say they provide more calcium than anything else. But they're still compostable. You can throw them in. Okay, so we'll talk about kind of, now that we've gone through that, we'll talk about layering the compost material. So this is where we're going to diverge. This is where it's going to differ really based on the type of bin that you have. So with the cedar bin, if you want to point that out, the cedar bin right there. So cedar bin, we don't have it quite built yet, but with a cedar bin or just a basic kind of, square bin like that, you want to make sure that you're alternating layers of green materials and layers of brown material. And a good rule of thumb is for every 1 part green you want to put in 3 parts brown, right? So I'm going to put 3 times as many brown materials as you do green materials. A lot of people, the question that I get a lot is how do you get enough brown materials to really balance it out? This is, I think, kind of tricky just in general. What I usually suggest to people is making sure that, especially in the fall when you're raking up all the leaves or you're getting rid of all the dead stuff in your lawn, just to save it and you can kind of use it throughout the year. Also, I mean, if you work in an office and there's like shredded paper, or cardboard or things like that, you can always bring that home as well. Just sure, Lydia, do you have any other suggestions for browns?
For me, that's where I do like the 2 bin system. I like to have 1 bin that I just, when I do a bunch of yard waste, I pile it all up in. And then my other bin is where I actually do the mixing, but I have a big enough yard that I can afford that much space. So then when I put my, like, I dump my food scraps on, I can just put a little bit of leaves or whatever I have sitting next to it on it, which works out. That's my system. That's why I like having 2 bins.
So then when you're,
And it's
Yeah.
the road compost. Don't worry about anything. Parts of this or parts of that, just put it all in. And if you're willing to wait, that's, your system gets you great compost right away. But if you're lazy or sloppy like me, you just put it in.
That's
After a
true.
year,
Comes out the
It'll
other
be compost just like the other stuff.
that's true. And like,
Yes.
yeah, it's kind of like I said back at the beginning, you can make composting as easy or as hard as you want to, right? The easier it is, maybe generally the more time it'll take, the less efficient it is. But really, if, if, for example, I've just thrown stuff in the backyard before and just let it kind of decompose and compost, and it's not as efficient, but
I call
It-
it really compost.
yeah.
There's a term for that one.
Yeah. So then with the cedar bin, one thing also to note is that you want to make sure that you add a base layer of like wooden sticks or just rougher material. That just kind of allows more ventilation or more air to flow in from the bottom so it doesn't get like too wet. So just kind of, you can see those sticks like there, if you want to lay some down, Naomi. You're just going to put some of those like kind of in the bottom of the cedar bin.
No, it's a gloves on. Those are from my dad.
Huh?
It's. Don't. It's not bad.
Yeah, let's dump them in. Yay. So just like that, you'll want to just kind of put them in the bottom and just kind of create a base layer. Just like that. Perfect. So then the tumbler is a little bit different. So that's this kind of a bin. This bin is kind of very specific. This only really requires 1 part green to 1 part brown. So you're putting in equal amounts, equal amounts of food waste and yard waste. So this is a little bit easier in terms of getting brown materials. The important thing to note with the tumbler is that you only want to fill it to about 2/3. So about up to here. That you can let it sit. All right, so now that we have talked about layering, I like to make these workshops really interactive. So would any volunteers be willing to come up and practice layering with, let's try the cedar bin? There's no right or wrong. I mean, we're all learning here. We're all learning here. Try it out. Okay, all right. So we have some gloves over here if you want to just grab, and then all you're doing is kind of adding, let's just add 1 layer of green materials and 1 layer of brown materials.
Okay. So which to this one, right?
Just to that one. So we have our green materials right here. And then we have our brown materials right here. So we just want to add, I think we add much, we're just like 1 part, you want to add 1 layer of green, 1 layer of brown, and the ratios are up here. So this one. To that cedar bin right there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I would put this in first.
Either way, it doesn't really matter which one you put in first. Yeah, you just want to make sure the ratio is right.
Like put some of this on.
Yeah.
Then layer this.
All the way down to the side. Make sure that you want to put 2 more, 2 greens, you want to put, 3 times. Or, yeah. A little bit more than this, yeah. Much right. Okay, all right. All right, let's go in for volunteer. Get up and do it. And you can just put the gloves right there. Right. All right, so the third step is to maintain your compost pile. So we want to make sure, so like I said before, the microbes that help break down your compost need 2 things to survive. They need water and they need air. So with your compost, you want to make sure that your monitoring the moisture level, and I'm going to pass around. I have 2 damp sponges, so I can sort of see. I'm going to pass the other one around, Naomi. So you can sort of see kind of what the moisture level you want. It doesn't have to be perfectly just like that, but just so you get an idea of the kind of what moisture level you want your compost to be. And so you want make sure you really get a nice squeeze. So I always tell people there's really no rule as to how much you want to check your compost moisture level. I just say when you put stuff in, just give it a quick check. If it's too dry, you want to add a little bit more water. Does anyone have a guess of what you would do if your compost was too, I'm sorry if people hate the word moist, but if it's too moist? Does anybody know what you would do? What materials are generally drier that you could add to your compost? Yeah. So if it's too damp, you want to make sure you're just gonna add some brown materials and then stir it up just to get that kind of, just to have the browns absorb more of that moisture, just to get some more airflow through the compost. So that's really all you have to do. The other thing you want to do is make sure those microbes are getting that air or that oxygen. So you want to mix. And again, how you mix your compost is going to be really based on your container type, right? So with the tumbler, it's fairly simple. You're going to give it like 3 to 4 turns every 2 days, just making sure that when you finish turning, the top is facing up like this so the water can sort of drain out. It doesn't necessarily stay like this if there's no materials in it, but it will. The other with your compost or with your cedar bin or just general kind of square bin, you're going to mix it depending on, if you're doing hot composting, you're going to mix it based on the heat content of the compost. So what happens is when you add enough materials, right, the middle of your compost is going to start heating up, and it's going to heat up to about 130, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it heats up, it's going to plateau for a little bit, and the temperature is going to start to decrease. Once that temperature starts to decrease is when you want to start mixing. And has anyone made cookies before, or like bread or anything? So you know how you stir cookies, you stir it from the middle and then you kind of work your way out. At least that's how you're supposed to do it. But I don't always do it that way, but it's a good visual. Yeah. But so that's, and you can just use, we have a pitchfork there, we have a shovel there, and then you'll just kind of mix it out using a pitchfork or a shovel. The reason why you want to mix from the inside out is because the inside materials are going to be a little bit hotter, so they're going to have decomposed a little bit more. So you kind of want to spread that love around. And people have asked me about how do you check the temperature. I mean, some people really want to get fancy with it and buy a thermometer. I say you can also just put your hand in there and check too. That's a easier, cost-effective way, because usually you're adding stuff. Yeah.
Just hover above, you'll see.
Yeah.
If it's chilly out, you'll see.
Yeah.
You'll see.
It'll see.
Yeah, you'll steam too. Yeah. So, so the next thing that we're going to have another volunteer come up and do is we're going to have a volunteer come up and check the moisture level of the compost and decide if it needs to have more water or more brown materials, and then do a little bit of a turn. Is anyone feeling brave? They want to come up and do it? And Naomi, if you want to help them get just kind of any stuff they need.
Say how often you mix if it's a bit. It's only
Like often.
2-3 days.
Yeah, it's every couple weeks. Yeah, so it's a little bit. You're doing it a little bit less frequently. It really just depends on how quickly it heats up. So
Yeah, it depends on how often you're putting stuff in there.
That's just.
Yeah.
Based on how.
and generally you have to accumulate, a couple layers of items before it'll start, especially with the cedar bin, before it'll start really heating up. Before you want to start turning it. Anybody want to come up and try?
Naomi, you can just do it. We'll watch.
All right.
But the rest isn't, so.
I would say let's add some water. Yeah.
Okay, with the water.
Yeah. So just gonna add a little bit of water.
So that's your question.
Yeah. I got it up, yeah. That's what we're under. And then we'll mix it from the inside out.
I can use the shovel or the pitchfork.
Yeah.
Okay. Pitchfork. Okay.
So in the spring, if that's open and we get like a lot of rain, which we haven't.
Yeah.
If it's not open, then we could get it. I need to back. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know if I'm doing this
But you
correctly.
could charge.
I personally don't, I'm more Patricia's style, where it's like.
It's not necessarily.
Also, yes, like I just threw the top layer, just like,
If we get the-
I didn't want it to like pop. Yeah. Like kind of get
Like,
like sure the stuff in the middle is fine out.
Like,
Yeah.
I
That's what we need to do.
Yeah, ideally would go, if it would get absolutely perfect, but in reality, things are always kind of.
So if you start composting like in this fall. Food scraps and kind of afraid of those, so, but people out there composting things. Like how long does it actually take to compost? If you start in the fall, I would probably fill that. Is it ready to go by spring garden?
I would say it depends on if you're putting stuff in there
Yeah.
every week. Food scraps, yeah. If you're really diligent and
Turn it all into.
yeah, but if you're not out there, you do it all winter. It's basically,
Stays on.
Do you just mix the snow in?
Yeah.
That's
Okay, that's the way to do moisture.
Yes, I
If it freezes up on top, you just.
if you're using it actively, the snow will melt off. It won't.
It'll be down.
Yeah,
Oh, I
because it'll stay, well, spoilers, then like you said, stay like 130, 160 degrees. But if you're actively going, but if you're just piling food scraps up, freeze and then
Don't breathe.
I'll freeze and then spring, it's not gonna be ready to go, but it'll be there, ready to melt and get started.
And it just goes a little bit slower. Like I said, just goes a little bit slower in the winter if you don't have that same heat for sun.
Out the version of two, you can put a part over just to keep animals. So,
Well, I've been problematic, but I don't want them to become problematic. So last week we saw family of four just like right through the neighborhood. So, yeah, and I'm kind of afraid that I would create a supply more than I can use as well.
and
No such thing.
if you have a yard,
You can just mix it with your yard,
just
yeah.
keep piling.
Potted plants, you can use it in potted plants or to grow seedlings. There's just so many different, yeah.
Yeah, my yard's a mess, so I have been just like leveling out.
A lot of like patches
Yeah.
that need seeds, so I feel like it would be perfect to put a little bit of that.
Yeah, just mix it up to top like 6 inches of soil and then there you go. It's a soil bed.
Yeah, we wanted to do.
Oh, that'd be.
Yeah. So we're passing around.
You've been said. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Finished promise.
So you always have to. Feel free to open the bag.
Tool, like that's what it is.
Totally different.
I was just,
Oh, yeah. I don't know if it actually is smell. This is from last year.
oh, yeah.
That's from last year.
Yeah. So I used it for the workshop last year that I did. So it might not have the same musty smell.
Wait, this is just straight up brown and green.
Yeah.
Seriously?
It's for my friend's compost. She's really, yeah.
A little bit more in the world.
Yeah.
And it turns out you feel like
So.
This is what it really looks like.
This is if you're a lazy composter like me, this is
Yeah.
what comes out.
Yeah, then you get.
Yeah.
This is it.
That's what, like, yeah. So you can tell the difference between someone who's like super diligent, like your friend, versus me, who,
And how old is this?
that's from last year.
So last summer.
Yeah.
So would that be the winter? Spun around. And no,
Yeah.
no concern about the ratio, you just dump it and see what you get.
Yeah, well, like I said, I keep like a pile of my browns
Yeah.
and then I'll just add it, but I don't measure.
But that one's usable, like you can totally, that's, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just later. So it just says from this morning and it's the least, you know. Yeah, I've got my name all over it.
That's the dirt.
too.
Yeah.
No.
With compost is close by.
Yeah, so go through the thicker and then scan those cans. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the point is that compost is, you kind of know when it's done when it's like that darker color, like that dark brown or black color. And it's sort of a loose kind of.
I've just never seen it get to that. It's always been a.
Yeah.
That I don't, when I'm spraying for that, so it's pretty hot.
Yeah, yeah, you like know what's going on, so.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I do know it's. The thing is I just, that's where it lies, that one can sometimes be used.
Like the,
City yard.
okay. And that's, I guess, everybody's yard is different. My yard is such like patchwork pieces that it's being, I'm gonna say my yard's under personal construction. That I have use for it everywhere, but maybe if your yard is more put together.
Yeah.
I mean, I just bought my first house and I have some plants, but I'm sure if I had a garden forever, I might not.
But in the spring when you're gardening, you start to sort of buy that much. That whatever you're putting in your box.
Yeah.
So.
And as a mulch replacement, I think everybody probably feels, it depends on how picky you are about it. I definitely am using it instead of mulch. I just really put another layer of compost instead of trying to use something. Yeah, moisture.
Well, just like you say, for gardening plants and. Entries.
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah. So what did you all notice? Or I guess maybe you want to ask.
Oh, yeah, just what you noticed about like how it feels, what it smells like. You bought it outside. It smells good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's styrofoam.
I know, is it perlite?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's.
It's water.
Yeah. So, and even that, I mean, I have a friend who just is like very diligent. I mean, she's
Yeah,
very,
you say she screens.
yeah, she
She's
screens
like,
it. You don't need to do that. Like she gets very,
Waves.
yeah. She gets very into it. But I mean, again, like compost can look like that too. It doesn't necessarily need to, but just kind of, it should look, brown, or it should look like I have a brown or black color. Things should be a little bit more broken down so that it should resemble like soil more than it resembles, the materials that you put in. And again, it should, like Naomi said, it should have this kind of earthy smell.
Although we did say those have been sitting in that bag for a little over a year.
They've lost their.
Yeah, I need to replace my compost.
I put that.
Yeah. All right, and you want to talk about the different uses for the compost now?
So sorry, your comment, Tricia, baked in the back of your cart, do you ever have to worry about like, we're hearing about more and more kind of like jumping worms and things like that. Do you ever have to worry about any of that in your compost?
That's a good question.
Or some beetles that are.
So one of the nice things about compost,
Yeah.
jumping worms is a whole nother thing, and we can direct you to more
Yeah.
info on that we admittedly, we talked about whether or not we should bring it up and
Yeah.
decided it's just the
It's
same
so
issue.
much, yeah.
Yeah.
The beauty of compost is that once you get into that about 131.
Yeah, it kills that.
So it kills off most viruses and most,
Of course.
like,
Yeah.
so that's like one of the nice
Yeah.
parts about it, and it'll kill most, if not all, seeds too, if you're getting hot enough.
Yeah.
So like if you put weeds in, you really shouldn't put things in when they're like just went to seed, like weed seed, but if they're getting, if you are the person who's being like super specific about it, so the whole thing's getting hot everywhere, those seeds are gonna die. The reason why we say not to is because for most of us, we're not gonna have a thermometer out there.
We're not gonna do the composting perfectly. Yeah.
So probably some seeds are gonna get through, but most viruses, diseases, and seeds are gonna die around that temperature.
That's a satisfying answer. We don't have to talk about.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's good.
So I think we talked about this a little bit more, but Naomi, do you want to just go over kind of how you can use it?
Yeah, just reviewing a couple ways we can use our compost when it's done. So first of all, just in the garden, you're gonna want to add a couple inches on the top, like half a foot of soil, and it'll add the nutrients and give the benefits we talked about. You can also use it to do seedling starts. So it makes it easier for the seeds to emerge and become plants. And yeah, there's also some data that suggests that the microbes in the compost kind of help fight different pathogen activity and make the seeds stronger. And yeah, the last way is you could even put it in your potted plants inside to give them a little extra boost and make them healthier.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways. Even if you don't have like a garden, you can use it for seedling starts or potted plants, or even like Lydia said, just put it on your lawn too.
Or
So there's
Christmas presents for your friends.
that's true. Yeah, especially for your friends who are really like who are plant parents, you know.
That people hold like.
It's like, oh, you like it?
Take more of it. It's like zucchini.
Basil. That we're gonna start.
There we go.
Like, oh, you like it?
Oh, next time it's the garden tool swap, compost swap.
Does your, just FYI, I don't know if you want to go into this, but it does say what you just said, that jumping worms don't survive over 100 times. So let's just wait until sleep and they'll.
Yeah. So speaking of worms, the reason why we didn't bring it up, because we're also going to talk about vermiculture for a little bit. We didn't want to get people confused, but so we just wanted to offer some alternatives to backyard composting. We know that it's not accessible to everybody, right? Not everyone has a backyard. Some people live in an apartment. So we're offering two kind of suggestions if you don't have that. So vermiculture is just composting. You can do it indoors or outdoor, but it's composting that's done with worms. Essentially, they eat the materials, they digest it, and when they poop it out, it's a nutrient-dense substance that you can use as compost. All you really need to start it, like it says up there, are red worms, plastic container with a fitted cover, really any container that's not going to break down with a fitted cover. Just make sure you poke holes in for oxygen, and food waste and strips of paper. That's really all you need. And it's super simple, and you can just start it in your kitchen. Not everyone wants to have worms in the kitchen, but if you're bold, you can start at your kitchen. It's a great alternative to doing backyard composting.
Adding worms to your backyard.
It can help break it down. Yeah, but if it gets hot, then
Yeah,
you're
I
gonna
know.
survive. So yeah. Yeah, we actually have. So I'm going to hand this out. We have a handout on vermiculture. So we didn't go into much depth, but I'm going to take one and pass it around. If anyone's interested, that's a really great. It's a really great overview and outline of how to kind of do it. So just putting in a plug for that. Or if anybody that you know is interested in composting, but is like, hey, I just don't have the capacity or the space to do a backyard. This is a great suggestion. And again, it's so heavily focused on food scraps. That's a great way to use that as well.
That's kind of specific. Are those the same kind of like worms that you see coming up out of your soil?
No, it's a very specific. There's like, I don't remember there's like a Latin name for it. Yeah.
Yeah, red wigglers.
So are they what fishermen people use?
I don't think so, but I'm not good with my worms. I just know they're called red wigglers.
Yeah.
And that they're the best ones for it, but they know.
They're called, so the Latin name here is Esenia fetida. So red wigglers, like it says on the sheet.
Are they like native here though? Cause like.
Yeah, good.
If you're keeping them contained in the,
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of gets an exotic side.
Could you?
Don't let it out.
Yeah.
Could you put the worms if you had the bin kind, the brown and black?
I would say it's gonna get the tumbler gets hot. I would say you probably want to avoid putting them in. If you're doing hot composting, which is just making it so they're heating up, you probably want to avoid putting them in because they're just gonna die anyways.
Yeah.
They tend to migrate,
Yeah.
so then you're tumbling and.
Yeah.
And the garden all around the.
And I will admit, I've done vermiculture composting once. It's not my area of expertise, but I know people who do it in their kitchen, and it seems to work for them. So I just wouldn't recommend maybe doing it in like, again, if you're doing hot composting, putting it in your backyard compost. This is just a good alternative view.
But they do eventually die. I mean,
They do.
so they're going to be mixed into your garden. I think the question is a really good one. Because if you don't, you want them to be dead when you put them in your soil.
Mhm.
The worms.
Oh, like when you're harvesting the vermicompost,
Yeah, when you're, yeah. exactly.
when you're like getting. the
Mixing it
soil
in.
and that. When, for me, when I was doing vermicomposting, I was not putting a lot of food in, so I wasn't producing a lot, but I found that like you said, the worms kind of just go to the bottom, so you kind of
Mhm.
scrape off the top. And then
Oh, interesting.
they stay
Yeah.
at the bottom. If you reach too deep and you haven't fed them enough, you're picking up just.
I mean, they do die eventually, but,
I'm sure they're.
yeah.
It wasn't a problem as far as like pulling out compost that didn't have worms in it, but I was not producing a lot, so I don't know. How that.
And then the other alternative is our drop-off sites. So again, I think some of you have used our drop-off sites. We have a handout with more information about where they are, especially in the city, but there's a few in the city. There's a bunch more in other areas of Ramsey County. And a lot of times they just look like this. It's just kind of it looks like a garbage bin. You just go and you can drop off your food scraps. But some of these sites also double as a yard waste site, so you can bring your yard waste there. So it's not the most convenient. We hope to have curbside composting at some point with the city, but this is a good, this is kind of an alternative that we offer until then. And it might help you save you a little bit of money, since a lot of times people can have their yard waste picked up by the garbage company.
So
So
this is free.
this is free. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was
Yeah.
looking up, it's like $3.
Yeah, if you get it picked up, so with you get picked up by the haulers, it costs money, but if you bring it over to one of these drop-off sites, then so there's a bunch. So there's thank you, Sue. She's put a handout. So those just have the ones that are in the city of St. Paul. There are other ones in Ramsey County. And in fact, if you just Google Ramsey County yard waste sites, it'll show you a map of where all the yard waste and food waste drop-off sites are. So it's a great alternative to say, if you're like, I want to compost, I don't have the time or the capacity to do backyard composting or vermiculture, you can just bring it there if you want to reduce your waste a little bit.
And then you can pick up. At the yard.
Mhm. All right, and that's all I have.